if that's even a word, changed. That they developed and evolved. And so it wasn't after their kind, it changed to a different kind. Again, it's the exact opposite of what God's word says. You actually have to come to a point of, do I believe God, do I believe God's word, or do I believe man? And that's where you have to come to at some point in this. But natural selection is the major concept that was developed by Charles Darwin. In fact, the full title of his 1859 book was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So he even uses by means of natural selection. He puts that as, this is the prime reason why we have all the different varieties of animals and creatures on the face of the earth. Natural selection, again, refers to the survival of the fittest, and I think we're all familiar with that. We've heard it enough through the years. And it tells us, it says that traits that improve a creature's chance of survival are preserved for future generations, and in this way, small beneficial changes direct evolution. That's what natural selection is all about. Over millions of years, they say, tiny changes produce new structures and new creatures. So, one creature says, well, I don't need legs. And so it lost its legs. Thereby we have the snake, which everybody knows and loves. And then on the other hand, you have other branches of the same reptile family who said, no, we do need legs. And thereby you have all the lizards and monitors and all the different animals along that line. But Darwin called this descent with modification. So that's that idea. Darwin emphasized the word natural selection. In other words, it happened on its own. It's naturally occurring. There's not some designer. There's not some grand plan, directing all of this is going on. It's just natural. It just happens. Sort of like the boys will be boys things, and it's just, that's what happens when you have boys and that sort of a thing. But Darwin obviously rejected any idea of design by an outside intelligence. He said there seems to be no more design in the variability of organic beings and the action of natural selection than in the course which the wind blows. So the wind on its own decides, anyway. I don't want to go down that road. It's not what we're talking about right now. But I certainly did think about that as we were studying this. Darwin's objective was to provide a mechanism to explain life apart from God. And we talked about this in the introduction to evolution. He said, or Darwinism is the theory of random, purposeless variations acted on by blind, purposeless natural selection. If it's purposeless, then how is it the better that lasts and the not better doesn't last, doesn't survive? How is it survival of the fittest if it's purposeless? Those two don't even fit together, really, if you think about it. But also, look at this other quote. Man is the result of a purposeless and natural process that did not have him in mind. So really the goal is this: to deny God's purpose. God had a purpose in creation. God had a purpose in creating man. God created, and when I say man, I'm not talking about the male of the species. I'm talking about all of humanity. The reason that God created us was for the very purpose of having fellowship with God. Darwin didn't want to admit that. No, there's no purpose. So what they're doing is they're denying God's purpose. They're totally obstructing all of that. I'm going to read a couple of verses here. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Okay, here's the reality. What is it that everybody says? Something bad happens, and what does everybody say? They say, everything happened for a reason. Everybody says that. Religious, non-religious, pagan, whatever. Doesn't matter. They all say that. But if you believe what Darwin promoted, everything does not happen for a reason. It's just random. It has no purpose. God says no, everything does happen, not for a reason, but for a purpose, which is different. A reason can sometimes be an excuse. God does things for a purpose. In other words, there is a goal. There's a good goal in mind in the end. Over in 2 Timothy 1, verse number 9, who hath saved us and called us with an holy calling, not according to our works, but according to his own purpose and grace, which was given us in Christ Jesus before the world began. Over in 1 John chapter 3, and verse number 8, we're told, he that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. But again, what evolution is trying to do is deny God's purpose. Oh, there's no reason for any of this. It's all, it's all fake. It's all meaningless. It's all purposeless. Back in Isaiah 55 and verse 11, God says, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it will accomplish that which I please. And it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. What that verse tells us is God has a purpose in what he says. God has a purpose in what he does. And so, again, Darwinism is set to tell people that there is no purpose. And God says, no, there is a purpose, but it's my purpose. And that in itself tells us why evolution as a theory exists. To deny God his purpose. To say, no, there is no purpose, there's no reason. Let's go on here. And we see, first of all, that natural selection can only explain minor variations within a species. Natural selection might explain something like the size of a finch's beak, but it has never proven to be the mechanism for the supposed transmigration of species. If you look back through your family tree, if you have pictures of family going back a number of different generations, you can pick out family traits. You know, how far apart your eyes are set, your cheekbones, your lips, your chin, the nose that you have, whatever. You can see that. That's carried down. It's carried on through the family line. That is what we're talking about. Natural selection can explain that just because those traits are carried on. But you know what? You go back as far as you can with photography, and then even with paintings. You go back with lifelike paintings at least, and you know what you find? People are still the same. Their nose has always been right there in the middle of their face, unless they're deformed. And there are those cases, sad though they are. And we always have 4 fingers and a thumb on each hand, and same thing, with our foot. So again, there's deformities. The Bible even mentions some of those that have occurred in time. But those are the odd one. So you have 6 fingers, and there are people who have 6 fingers. I've met some in my lifetime. The Bible talks about some like that. But you know, you would think that extra finger would be a help. You would think you could grip better if you had an extra finger, you know. And yet it's an anomaly. It's an unusual occurrence, and it doesn't stay. The next generation doesn't have that. So I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, but it all goes to this. Here's the thing. Charles Darwin did not give any evidence of how one type of animal could evolve into another. He said it happened. He gave no evidence. He gave no proof. And yet, on the basis of no proof, we're told that we're supposed to believe this. Now, we're also told that proof exists today. We may talk about that in the future. But in talking about this, let's see, what evidence could be out there? If you go to the British Natural History Museum's website, they offer this proof of natural selection. They talk about the apple maggot. I know it's something that we think about every day. I wish I had me some apple anyway. But here's their quote unquote proof. They have apple maggots that change from eating apples to eating hawthorn fruit. And so therefore they say, see, that's natural selection. See, there's a change, but it's still the same maggot. It's just that its diet changed. And you know what? Sort of reminds me of the 2 guys with their dogs. And the one was saying, yeah, my dog, you know, I gotta buy him this frou-frou dog food because he won't eat anything else. And the other guy said, well, I feed my dog greens. Man, how'd you do that? My dog would never eat anything like that. And the other guy said, yeah, mine didn't either for the first 3 weeks. You know, that's the thing. You know, anybody can change their diet. Okay, we can do that. And, you know, we can go from eating, you know, pork to eating lamb, or to eating chicken or turkey, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Does that mean that we have now changed into a different sort of a creature because we've done that? Well, no. But that's what they're offering as proof. That's not proof. That's like somebody walking across from McDonald's to Wendy's, you know. Okay, you know. It's not any different, you know. You're still eating, and the maggot is still eating. It's just not eating apples, it's eating the hawthorn fruit. Big deal. That doesn't prove anything because it's still the same maggot. It's not a different creature. And so again, the very proof that they're offering is not really legitimate proof. Also, we need to consider bird evolution as an example of what would be required if evolution were true. And these things we're going to look at, these are by no means exhaustive in all the different things that would have to happen. But first, the heavy earthbound body would have to evolve into a lightweight aerodynamic one. Okay, so there would have to be a major structural change to the outside of the body to make it aerodynamic, to the, you know, the density of the body. That would be another major change, all a part of that. Also, solid bones would have to evolve into hollow bones that are light but incredibly strong. But how would evolution, how would natural selection know that hollow bones would work? You see what I'm saying? If it's purposeless and it's natural selection, how would they know that this is going to be better and thereby go that direction? So the third thing, scales would have to evolve into complex flight feathers. And again, they say that this is what happened, but that is part of the process. See, that's what happened, but there was a process in there if what they're saying is true. And we'll talk about that here in just a second when I get done with this. Then bellows-like lungs would have to evolve into the avian sac-like lungs. So a total change in the bone structure, total change in the lung structure. Then an egg with a leathery covering would have to evolve into an egg with a hardened calciferous shell. Okay, that's a big change. A land-bound reptile brain would have to evolve into an avian brain capable of thriving in a completely different environment, because where reptiles live is not the same place where birds live. So it's a totally different environment that they would have to change into. A creature that can only grunt or squeal or croak would have to evolve the ability to sing pretty songs. And then the last thing, a creature that lives and dies in one place would have to evolve the ability to migrate long distances, including understanding seasons, understanding directions. All of that would have to be evolved into that being. And we'll discuss some of that a little bit. And this amazing reptile to bird evolutionary process, which is blind, non-intelligent, directionless, and purposeless, as we said, would have to produce 24 orders of birds, from eagles to woodpeckers to swans to penguins to hummingbirds. All of this randomly, without purpose, and yet they all fulfill their purpose. The process that produces minor adaptive changes in a creature and the isolation of various inherent genetic traits has never been demonstrated to be the process that can change one type of animal or plant to another. It's never been proven, never been shown, but it's one of those, listen to me because I'm saying it. Not here's the proof, now you decide. That's not what it is. It's I'm saying it, therefore it's true. Because there is no proof for natural selection. Also, natural selection can only select, as its name implies. It cannot build, it cannot create. But again, in talking about that going from the dinosaur to the bird, there has to be some building, there has to be some creation, because there's too much change for it just to be a natural selection. Anyway, natural selection cannot produce new creatures because it has no creative power to add information to the creature's DNA. So let's talk about DNA, something that we all hear about all the time. And if you like watching crime TV and things like that, which I do enjoy, especially, I don't like the ones, where in the end, well, we really don't know. It's like, no. Don't waste my time with that. I want to know in the end who did it, and I want to know that they, that they justly received, justice for what they've done. Anyway, so we all have an idea of what DNA is because of those sorts of things. But each living cell has a copy of its own DNA. The thing is, DNA is different, and we know this. We know that DNA can identify an individual. But DNA between human beings and animals is not the same. It's not the same at all. We mentioned junk DNA a little bit last week. And that we were told, well, that's just leftovers from evolution. And then, of course, they figured out since that, no, all of that is important. And all of that has to do with something today. But humans have 10 to 100 trillion cells. Yes, count them. And the body forms some 300 billion new cells every day, 200 million per minute. That's sort of mind-boggling. We could break that down to the second. I should have done that because it's mind-boggling to think how many that is. The DNA in one cell holds information equivalent to at least 10,000 large books, and probably much more, And we say probably much more because scientists are continually finding new information in the DNA. DNA, as we know, is the blueprint that contains the instructions for making a building, making a body, making whatever life form that DNA is tied to, whether it's plant life, animal life, or human life. Excuse me. DNA has the instructions to make the individual. The cell reads the instructions and makes the various parts of your body. And not only does each cell contain the information to build the body, but it also has the machinery to make the body from that information. It does that by making proteins and other things and using those to build the living body. The DNA information is passed on from generation to generation. That's how you can tell, oh, this DNA, this was from a parent, a grandparent. They can tell this is lineage. This is some relative from the past, because that DNA is passed on from one generation to the next, and it never results in a different kind of living thing. Now, you know, those of you who have had children, and you know, when a newborn is born, you think, well, this is new. This is not human. Because that's what a newborn baby doesn't look right, you know, and after a while, then they look pretty human, and then you think, well, they look human, but they don't act anything. Anyway, but that's the way we think. But here's the thing, in developing this idea about DNA, and that is to build something new. Okay, so going back to our dinosaur to bird theory, to do that, such as growing feathers and wings on a dinosaur, it would require huge amounts of new information in the DNA, because the DNA is the DNA is the DNA. It is what it is. It says what it says. It builds what it builds. It doesn't change. So what you would have to do is pull out certain aspects and insert other aspects. You know, that's what people are doing now with their genetic engineering. They're trying to play with DNA. And they're finding that, yeah, they know about some things, and they're finding that, no, they don't know about other things because of their successes and failures. But here's the thing. Natural selection has no power to pull out one section of DNA and insert something else. You see what I'm saying? Natural selection can only deal with what's there. It can't. But again, in Darwin's day, they didn't know anything about DNA. And so them trying to explain, well, it's like this and it's like that, which we'll deal with here in just a second, that would, in the day, if you're looking to believe something other than God, you could look at that and say, well, that makes sense. But today, knowing what we know about DNA, it says what it says, it builds what it builds, it doesn't, there aren't varying applications to DNA. DNA is always going to do what it does. My DNA is not going to produce a chicken, no matter how much chicken I eat. You know, it's just not going to work that way, because my DNA doesn't read chicken. It reads human and human male and so on. And so natural selection has no power. So let's look at this. Darwin believed in Jean Lamarck's theory that the giraffe got its long neck by stretching to reach higher branches of trees. Now that's what was believed. But again, that's before they understood DNA. DNA says you will have a long neck or you will not. You can't pull out this bit of DNA and insert something else. That's not natural selection. Natural selection can only deal with the DNA that's there. It can't input, it can't omit. Natural selection doesn't have that creative power. It would take some sort of design to produce that. Anyway, uh, again, in light of the discovery of DNA, that theory seems silly. It just does. Frederick Weissman disproved that theory with his experiments with mice. Now, this is not a theory I would want to reproduce, but he cut off the tails of 901 mice for 19 generations. But the baby mice always had full tails. It's like nothing changed. Well, but they all, natural selection, they all lost their tail. Sort of like geckos. Anybody ever been around geckos? When I was in Papua New Guinea, I used to have them climb up the wall of my room. And ours didn't grow really very big because we were up in the mountains. So we were kind of high, and so they didn't grow very big. They were down on the coast, they grew bigger. But they were about that long. Just little bitty things crawling all over the wall. And I thought, oh, how neat. Of course, I was what, 15 at the time. So of course, I needed to catch one. And so the first 3 or 4, I caught their tail. And you know, geckos, they'll lose their tail. You know, that's part of their defense mechanism as God created them. But you know what happens with the next generation? They are still born with a tail, even though that one lost its tail. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't change just because that's not how it works. So anyway, let's go on. Natural selection, not being able to see or work toward a future goal because it's natural selection, it's purposeless, would not select something that would not be helpful for the creature's immediate survival. Again, that's not even considered, is it? Going back to the idea of the dinosaur to the bird. In the middle of that, you're going to have some sort of weird something that is not going to survive. It's not going to survive the millions of years necessary to develop all the way over into a bird. Because it doesn't have the scales anymore. It's got a half scale, half feather. So it has no protection, right? And it doesn't have the heavy body weight that it needs because its bones are lighter. Well, that means as the heavier, not yet evolved dinosaurs are running around, they're going to crush its bones and they're all gone. They're extinct before they get to develop into a bird. You see what I'm saying? Natural selection doesn't even provide for the opportunity for evolution. Because if it doesn't help me now, sort of like the old Ford commercial, what have you done for me lately? That's the way natural selection works. If it's not going to help me now, immediately, in the here and now, then it's no good. Because there's no plan for, oh, well, I want to develop into a bird eventually. There's no plan for that because everything's purposeless. So again, there's even the testimony of Darwin himself really plays into this. He says, on the other hand, we may feel sure that any variation in the least degree injurious would be rigidly destroyed. So the little dinosaur, his arms are now half wings. But so it has no hands anymore. It's half wings. Sorry, even according to Darwin himself, that's going to be destroyed. That's going to be made extinct. It can't survive, even by his own theory. Partly formed and therefore useless, presently useless structures, such as developing wing or leg or flipper or lung or heart, would not be preserved. So again, we talked about the bird, so I'm not going to go through that again. But as we go on, also, natural selection requires competition for survival of the fittest. But as we look at nature, we don't see competition. What we see is interrelatedness. So you have, oh, but wait a minute, you have this animal that eats that animal. Yes, that's right. And then what happens with that animal? It's used to, we have a food chain, right? Isn't it interesting We have, we have a food chain, and it's interrelated. It's not survival of the fittest. It's every aspect for the benefit of the other. Let's go on. And Darwin, he looked at it and he described nature as being everywhere, red in tooth and claw. Not reality. It's just not. We don't have to live in fear of our lives walking outside and the mosquitoes are going to kill me. Now we feel like it, when finally the rain stops and the mosquitoes come out of their hiding, it feels like they're going to kill us all. But you don't, you go out into out to Elk Island and you start hiking out there. You don't have to be afraid of the elk chasing you down and killing you, or the bison, trampling you. You don't have to worry about that. The way that Darwin put it is everything's against us. Everybody's out to get us. It's that idea. Nature is out to get every other part of nature. You get out of nature and you don't see that. Yes. Do bears kill animals and eat them? Yes, because that's how they eat. And that's how they survive, in part. And you have that with the wolves, you have that with other animals as well. Yes, that is how God made them, to do that. But there's still that interrelatedness. There's not a constant kill, 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 kill. Have you ever watched the National Geographic things where over in Africa, they'll show it some of the drier African nations, and here's this lake, or this, and not even a lake, but just a watering hole. And look, here's all the animals. You have the elephants, you have the lions, you'll have, all the various things that you can find there. And they're all at the same watering hole at the same time. And they're not chasing each other, they're not killing each other, they're because God created our world interrelated. So it's not always tooth and claw and just out to kill and out to take out the other. That's not how nature really is. So let's look at this. Let's consider first the laws of physics. Charles Townes, Nobel Prize laureate, is not a biblical creationist, but he said this. He said, "This is a very special universe. It's remarkable that it came out just this way." Now, again, that's obvious that he's not a biblical creationist, that it came out this way. It just happened. It just, no reason, it just happened. That's what he's saying. If the laws of physics weren't just the way they are, we couldn't be here at all. And that's absolutely true. The sun couldn't be there. The laws of gravity and nuclear laws and magnetic theory, quantum mechanics, and so on have to be just the way they are for us to be here. That does not make for nature out to destroy everything. It doesn't show a competition. It shows a finely tuned mechanism. And a finely tuned mechanism tells us that there must be a designer. That's again going from effect back to cause, looking at creation and working back to cause. Astronomer Paul Davies said, "On the face of it, the universe does look as if it has been designed by an intelligent creator expressly for the purpose of spawning sentient beings. Like the porridge in the tale of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the universe seems to be just right for life." Well, yeah, it is, obviously, because here we are. So when we consider the law of physics, everything works together. It's not a constant struggle and dog-eat-dog type world. That's not the reality. That's just Darwin's thinking. Let's consider humans and intestinal bacteria. So this is going to be a good one. So bacteria are not a part of the human body. but they do things that the human body cannot do for itself, but which are necessary for its survival. They synthesize vitamins essential for nutrition, such as vitamin K, niacin, and B complex vitamins. Friendly bacteria kill harmful bacteria. So when you go totally antibacterial, you're not helping yourself. We're not, but that's just the way it is. And then bacteria synthesize niacin to make NAD, which is necessary for energy conversion in the cell's mitochondria. So again, there's bacteria within the gut, and it's working for our benefit, even though it's a foreign body within our body. But no, it's supposed to be, that's not what we're told to expect. So if we're seeing something different than what we're told to expect, then we need to reconsider the conclusions that we're expected to come to. Also consider the Earth's ecosystem. So there's the oxygen cycle. We know about this. We hear about it all the time. You know, plants taking carbon dioxide. We don't hear about that so much, but it's still true, and it produces oxygen. Animals and human beings take in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. We all know this. It works together. The plants do not work against us. They help us. Plants are our friends. Now, I'm not saying go out and hug a tree. I'm not saying that at all. We need to look beyond the tree. The tree didn't just decide, you know what, I'm going to help those stupid humans because they can't produce oxygen on their own. That's not what happened. God created it that way. And then we have the water cycle. Again, you have vaporization, buoyancy, condensation, precipitation, soil permeating, and distribution. So all of that, part of the water cycle. If we didn't have the water cycle, we'd be in trouble. We really would. And, thank God for it. So, in the end, natural selection is the main mechanism of evolution as proposed by Charles Darwin. It refers to survival of the fittest, which is supposed to result in change to creatures that leads to evolution, leads to the creating, I suppose, of other creatures. Natural selection, though, can only explain small variations within the creature itself. It cannot explain how creatures came into being. Natural selection cannot build because it can't add new information to the DNA. That DNA, it is what it is. Then natural selection would not preserve something that would not be helpful for the creature's immediate survival, as we talked about before. And then natural selection requires struggle everywhere, but life shows interconnectivity. The fact that life is a giant system refutes natural selection. And again, it points to the reality of God. Again, if we look again in Romans chapter 1, what we find here, I believe in verse number 20, it says, for the invisible things of him, the invisible things of God, from the creation of the world are clearly seen. In other words, we can clearly see things about God from the creation of the world. As we're talking about this giant system of nature, whether it be the water system, the oxygen system, or the other things that we talked about, all of that, yes, it refutes natural selection, but it points to the fact that there is a purpose. There has to be a purpose, otherwise things wouldn't work like they do. When you do things haphazard, like you buy a bookshelf from IKEA and you just throw it together. For one thing, you end up with a pile of parts that you have no idea where they go. And for another thing, your bookshelf doesn't look like the picture. And for another thing, it doesn't work like it's supposed to. You have some of the shows like this, and all the different things that happen because we tried to do it haphazard. But the very fact that nature works in the way it does shows that there was a designer that took the time to put everything together according to his purpose. And again, that's what evolution is all about. It's all about denying God's purpose and thereby denying God. That's what it's all about. It really is a religion. It really is. And they deny it. They say, no, it's, whatever. But that doesn't change the reality of it. And so as we look at these things and as we consider it, what it does is it points again to the fact that God is real, that God is powerful, that God has a purpose. And if God has a purpose in creation, then God has a purpose for you as part of his creation. And that's an important thing that people, they miss. They really miss. And I hate that it's that way. But it nonetheless is true. And so let's take these things to heart and seriously consider them in light of what the Word of God teaches us. Let's stand together